The woman in the audience asked my sister where the recipes came from, and my sister said they came from me, every one of them. I built this out of nothing. I was watching it on a laptop in the walk-in cooler at 4 in the afternoon with flour on my forearms, because the cooler is the only place in that building where you cannot hear the mixers. She said it so easily. That is the part I keep going back to. There was no pause, no flicker, no small adjustment of the shoulders that a person makes when they are about to say something they will have to defend later. My sister looked at 300 people in a television studio in Atlanta and told them that the thing I had spent 19 years building had come out of her, whole, like weather. The audience applauded. Somebody in the second row put her hand over her heart. I want to be accurate about what I felt, because if I tell you it was rage, you will picture something with a lot of noise in it, and that is not what happened. What happened was that I got very cold, in a room that was already 38 degrees, and I noticed the cold, and I thought, that is interesting. I have never actually been cold in here before. Then I closed the laptop and went out and finished the laminated dough, because there were 11 dozen croissants proofing, and they do not care what is happening to you. That was a Tuesday in March. 2 weeks later, a woman named Priya Raghunnathan called my phone and introduced herself as outside counsel for Hale Brands Incorporated and asked, in the pleasant, flat voice of someone reading from a page, whether I would be willing to discuss a small documentary matter regarding certain historical contributions. I stood in the alley behind the bakery with my back against the cold brick. You mean the recipes, I said. I mean the chain of title, she said. And I understood, standing in an alley that smelled like yeast and wet cardboard, that my sister had made a mistake so large that she did not yet know it was a mistake, and that she had made it on television, in front of 300 people, with a microphone clipped to her collar. Some things you need to know, quickly, and then I will get out of the way and let it happen. The bakery is called Halloway's. It has been on the corner of Farrand and 9th since 1961, when my grandmother Inez took over a failing sandwich counter and started making the bread she had learned to make as a girl. My father took it over in 1988 and nearly lost it twice. I took it over in 2007, when I was 23, because he had a stroke on a Thursday morning between the first and second bake, and there was nobody else in the building who knew what the second bake was. I am the older one. I was born first by 4 years, and I have been arriving first at everything ever since, mostly because somebody had to and I was the one who was standing there. My sister is Camille. On television, she is Kami Hale, which is a name that tested well. I need you to understand something about her that will make the rest of this harder and truer. Camille is genuinely gifted, not at baking, at the thing that actually sells baked goods, which is making a stranger feel like they have been let into a family. She has a face that photographs like she is about to tell you a secret. She remembers the name of your dog. When she walks into a room, the temperature of the room changes, and everybody in it decides, without being asked, that they would like her to like them. That is not nothing. That is a real talent, and I have never once been able to do it. And here is the second thing, the one I have had to sit with. For a long time, we were good together. That is what nobody tells you about this kind of story. It is not that she was always a thief and I was always a fool. For 11 years, she stood at the front and I stood at the back, and it worked. It genuinely worked, and there were mornings in 2014 when we would be closing out the register at 9 at night, both of us gray with exhaustion, and she would say something stupid about a customer, and I would laugh so hard I had to sit down on a flour sack. I loved her, present tense, which is inconvenient. The recipes are mine. I want to be precise about that too, because the word recipe sounds like a card in a box, and what I am actually talking about is 19 years of work. Inez's bread was the starting point. Everything after that is mine. The morning bun that people drive in from 3 towns over for, that is mine, and it took me 406 attempts across 11 months to get the lamination to survive our summer humidity. The olive loaf is mine. The cardamom knot is mine. The sourdough we sell now is not my grandmother's. It is a culture I built in 2011 after our original mother died in a power outage, and I rebuilt it from a jar my father had frozen in 1996, and it took 14 months to bring it back to anything worth selling. I have written down every single thing I have ever done in this building. Every attempt, every failure, every temperature. Not because I am organized. Because in a bakery, if you do not write down the number is gone forever, and you will spend a year trying to find it again. 41 notebooks. Composition books, the black and white marbled kind, $3 a piece. Dated, numbered, and shelved. Camille used to make fun of them. She used to call it my diary. She would say, in front of customers, Greta writes it all down, in case there's a bread emergency, and everybody would laugh, including me. The brand started in 2019, and it started as a good idea, which is the only way anything like this ever starts. Camille had built our social media into something genuinely large. 110,000 people watched a woman in a beautiful apron pull trays out of a deck oven and say charming things. She was extraordinary at it. And in 2019, a small production company reached out about a series, and she came into the back at 10 at night, vibrating, and said, Greta, they want a film here. We sat on the bench by the loading door and we planned it out. The show would be about the bakery. Both of us. Her in front, me in the kitchen, which is exactly how it had always been and how I wanted it, because I would rather be dead than be on television. That is the sentence that cost me 4 years. I said it out loud, more than once, laughing. I would rather be dead than be on television. So she went, and she was wonderful. And the first series did well enough that there was a second, and by the second, there was a line of sheet pans with her name on them at a national retailer. And by 2021, there was Hale Brands Incorporated, a Delaware corporation, and a frozen dough licensing deal, and a book. The book is the part that still gets me in the ribs. It came out in the autumn of 2022. 240 pages, beautiful photography, a chapter about our grandmother that made me cry in a Target parking lot. 11 of the 42 recipes in that book are mine, taken out of my notebooks, transcribed by an assistant I never met, and printed with no name attached to them except hers. I found out it was happening about 6 weeks before publication, when the assistant emailed me a spreadsheet and asked me to verify the technical details. I verified them. I sat at my kitchen table at 11 at night with a glass of wine and fixed her hydration percentages, because they were wrong and I could not stand for them to go out into the world wrong. That is who I was. I want that in the record too. When I asked Camille about credit, she said, and I remember this exactly, Gret, it's a Kami Hale book. The whole point is that it's one voice. If we start doing recipe by on things, it turns into a phone book. And then, because she is not a monster and this is what makes it complicated, you know it's yours. I know it's yours. Everybody who matters knows it's yours. Everybody who matters. I said okay. I said it because the alternative was a fight in the middle of a launch, and because some part of me that I am still trying to dig out believed her, and because I have spent my entire life being the one who does not make it worse. Now the thing about the television studio in Atlanta. The show she was on that March was not her show. It was a syndicated daytime thing, the kind with a small orchestra, and she was promoting the second book. The clip ran 11 minutes. I have watched it, by my count, more than 60 times. At about the 7-minute mark, a woman in the audience with a nice voice stood up and said she had made the morning buns and they had come out perfect, and she wanted to know how Camille had learned to do that. And Camille told a story. She said she had been 19, working alone in the bakery after her father got sick, and that she had taught herself out of a stack of her grandmother's index cards, and that she had failed and failed and failed until one night at 3 a.m, it finally worked, and she sat down on the floor and cried. That is my story. Every single beat of it is mine, except that I was 23, and it was 406 attempts, not one night, and I did not cry. I threw a proofing basket at the wall and then went home and slept for 11 hours. At 19, Camille was in her second year of college in another state. Then the host asked whether she had ever had help, and Camille laughed and said, "Oh, there's a whole team now, absolutely," and the host said, "But at the start." And my sister said, "At the start it was just me. There was no one else. I built this out of nothing. There was no one else. I had been in that building at 4 a.m. for 6,000 days. I want to tell you that the lie was what broke it, but that is not quite true either. What broke it was smaller and stranger. It was that the story she told about the index cards and the 3 in the morning and sitting down on the floor and crying was a story I had told her. In 2009, on the bench by the loading door. She had taken the thing I had told her when I was tired and shaky and proud, and she had worn it, on television, as her own childhood. I did nothing for 11 days. I want to be honest about those 11 days because I think people imagine that you watch a thing like that and you act. I did not act. I baked. I ordered flour. I fixed the seal on the proofer. I had dinner with my husband Theo and did not tell him, and he knew something was wrong, and he did the thing he does where he waits, and I let him wait, which was not kind. I did not tell him because saying it out loud would have made it a real thing that required a decision, and I did not want a decision. I wanted to be the person who did not make it worse. I had been that person for 38 years, and I was extremely good at it. On the 12th day, my mother called. Inez is my grandmother, dead since 2004. My mother is Lorraine, and Lorraine Holloway is 74 and has never once in my life asked me a question about myself that was not a setup for something else. Did you see Camille on the program? She said. I saw it. She was so good. She was so natural. Marjorie called me about it. She was very natural, I said. And my mother said, in the exact pleasant tone she uses for the weather, you should be proud of her, Greta. She's done all this on her own. I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone. Mom. What? She didn't do it on her own. There was a pause on the line, a short one, and then my mother said something that I have thought about every day since and that I did not understand at all at the time. She said, don't start. Not, what do you mean? Not, of course, you've worked so hard too. She said don't start, in the voice of a woman heading something off, and there was a tightness in it that had nothing to do with a television program. She said it the way you say it when you already know. Priya Raghunathan called 8 days after that. Outside counsel for Hale Brands. Pleasant, flat, competent. She had the tone of somebody who has made this call several hundred times and has learned that the friendly version costs less. She said Hale Brands was completing a transaction. She used that word, transaction, the way you would say weather. She said that as part of the diligence process, the acquiring party had raised routine questions about the provenance of certain intellectual property, and that the company wanted to regularize the historical position. Meaning what, I said. Meaning we'd like you to sign a confirmatory assignment, she said. It's a standard instrument. It confirms that any contributions you may have made to the recipe portfolio during your time at the retail location were made in the course of your employment, and that ownership vested in the company. During my time at the retail location. Yes, I own the retail location, I said. The pause on the other end was about 3/4 of a second long, and I have replayed it enough times to be sure of it. And in 19 years of standing in a kitchen listening to people tell me what is and is not possible, I have learned to hear the exact sound of somebody discovering that their file is wrong. I'm sorry, Priya Raghunathan said. I have you listed as a manager. Who gave you that? I'll need to review the file, she said, and her voice had changed, very slightly, the way a stovetop changes when you turn it down. MS. Holloway, would it be all right if I called you back? She called back 4 days later, and by then she was not friendly. And by then I had gone up into the storage room above the office and taken down 41 composition books and driven them to a storage unit on the west side that I rented that same afternoon with cash. I did not do that because I had a plan. I want to be clear. I did not have a plan for another 11 weeks. I did it because I have spent 19 years learning one thing above all others, which is that when you are about to lose something, you write down the number before it goes. I told Theo that night. My husband teaches high school chemistry and has the patience of something geological. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which took about 40 minutes, and when I was finished, he was quiet for a while and then he said, okay. 2 questions. Okay. 1, do you actually own the bakery? Yes. Are you sure? I have been paying the property taxes on that building for 11 years, Theo. That's not what I asked. He put his hands flat on the table. Greta, I have watched you sign things in this kitchen at midnight for a decade because Camille needed them by morning. I am not saying you don't own it. I'm saying you should find out tonight before somebody tells you what you own. That is the second time in my life I have been genuinely afraid of a sentence. What's the other question? I said. When she said there was no one else, he looked up. Was that the first time? And I opened my mouth to say yes. And then I did not say anything at all for a long moment, because a door had opened somewhere at the back of my head, and behind it was a very long hallway. Here is the hallway. 1998. I am 14, Camille is 10. There is a regional baking competition at the state fair, and I enter it and I place second with a braided loaf. My father drives me. When we get home, my mother is on the phone with her sister, and she says, "Oh, they gave Greta a ribbon for the bread, and the word gave has done something to me for 28 years. 2003, I am 19. There is a program in Lyon. I want it more than I have ever wanted anything before or since. It is 9 months, it is expensive, and there is a scholarship. I apply in October. I never hear back. I tell myself it is because I was not good enough. And I go on telling myself that for a very long time. And in a way that is the whole story of my 20s, that particular sentence, running quietly underneath everything. 2007. My father has his stroke on a Thursday morning. I come home from the community college where I am doing a business certificate that I do not want, and I never go back, and nobody ever asks me whether I want to run a bakery. 2011. Camille comes back from college without finishing and moves into the apartment over the shop rent-free, and my mother says, to me, she's had a hard time. Be gentle with her. 2014 through 2019. The good years. I am not going to pretend they were not good. 2019. The show. 2021. Hale Brands Incorporated is registered in Delaware. I am not a shareholder. Nobody discusses this with me, and I do not ask, because at the time it is described to me as the TV thing, a separate box, nothing to do with the bakery. 2022. The book. 2024. Camille stops coming to the bakery, not dramatically. She is busy, and there are 2 assistants now, and the last time she stands at the front counter is a Saturday in June, and I do not know it is the last time. March, Atlanta. There was no one else. You look at that list laid out in a row, and it seems obvious. I need you to understand that it was not obvious, because I was inside it, and inside it, each of those things had a reason. Every single one had a reason that was offered to me kindly at the time by somebody I loved. That is how it works. Nobody hands you a life you did not choose in one piece. They hand it to you in slices, over 30 years, each one with a good reason attached, and then one afternoon you are 42 years old and standing in a walk-in cooler watching a stranger on a laptop tell 300 people that you were never there. The lawyer I found was not a good lawyer for this. I want to include that because everybody's first move in a story like this is wrong, and mine was too. He was a corporate guy downtown, referred by our accountant, $60 a minute, very confident. He looked at the corporate filings for 11 minutes and said the words "you have no standing" 3 separate times, which is a thing lawyers say when they mean I don't want this. But he did one useful thing before he showed me out. He pulled the state business registry on his own screen and turned it toward me. Halloway's Bakery, LLC, registered 2011. Members, Gretchen A. Halloway 60%, Camille R. Halloway 40%. There's your standing on the shop, he said. Whether that has anything to do with the recipes is a different question, and I'd say probably not. Recipes are famously hard. You can't copyright a list of ingredients. I know that. He raised an eyebrow. It was the first time in the meeting he had actually looked at me. You can't copyright a list of ingredients, I said. You can copyright the expression. The written text, the method, the photographs, the headnotes. It's thin. It's real, but it's thin. How do you know that? Because I have been writing recipes for 19 years, I said, and 11 of mine are printed in a book with somebody else's name on it, And I looked it up in 2022, and then I did nothing about it. And I have had 2 years to think about the fact that I did nothing about it. He gave me back my folder and wished me luck. In the parking garage, I sat in my car and did not start it for a while. 60/40. I had never seen that in writing before. I had signed something in 2011 at the kitchen table in my father's house, 4 months after he died, with a pen that skipped, and I had not read it, and my mother had said, "This is just so everything's tidy, Greta." 60/40, in my favor. Which meant that for 13 years I had been the majority owner of a business and had behaved, every single day, like an employee who was lucky to be there. Nobody did that to me. That one was mine. I want to tell you about the notebooks properly now, because they are the whole spine of this, and I have been describing them like an inventory. 41 composition books, 2007 to the present, $3 each. The first 11 have my father's handwriting in the front few pages because he started them, and mine after that. They are not recipe books. That is what everybody gets wrong, including Camille, including, eventually, a room full of lawyers. They are a record of failure. A page in a notebook looks like this: a date, a room temperature, a flower lot number, a hydration percentage, then a sentence like 78%, 24H retard, oven 465 falling 440, crumb tight and gummy at center, not enough steam or not enough time, try again Thursday. Then Thursday, then the Thursday after that. The morning bun took 11 months and 406 entries. You can read it. You can watch a 23-year-old woman fail 405 times in her own handwriting and get slightly better at describing why. Around attempt 200 the handwriting changes, gets smaller and more furious. At attempt 311 there is a page that says only, "I don't know what I'm doing. Ask Dad." And then, underneath, in different ink, added later, "Can't." That is what was in a storage unit on the west side of the city. Camille had never read them. Not once. She had made a joke about them for 15 years and never once opened one, and that is the single luckiest fact of my entire life, because if she had ever opened one, she would have understood immediately what she was making fun of. The second call from Priya Raghunathan came on a Friday, and she had a different voice, the way a corridor has a different voice when a door at the far end has closed. MS, Halloway, I want to correct something from our first conversation. Your ownership interest in the retail entity is noted. Noted? Yes, paper. I'd like to walk you through where things stand, and I want to be straightforward with you, because I think that serves everyone. Hale Brands is in an advanced process with a strategic acquirer. As part of that process, the Acquirers Council has asked for representations regarding the ownership of the recipe portfolio underlying the published works and the licensed product line. And you can't give them. I didn't say that. You wouldn't be calling me if you could. There was a pause, and then, unexpectedly, something almost human came into her voice. MS, Halloway, are you represented? No. Get represented, she said. Not because I'm threatening you. Because I'm going to send you a document on Monday, and I would rather you had somebody read it who does this for a living. The document arrived Monday. It was 11 pages. It was titled Confirmatory Assignment and Release, and paragraph 4 said that in consideration of the sum of $40,000, I would assign to Hale Brands Incorporated all right, title and interest in, and to any and all works of authorship, formulations, techniques, methods, processes, and know-how conceived, developed or reduced to practice by me at any time in connection with the Halloway's business or brand. From the beginning of time. From the beginning of time. That is a real phrase in commercial contracts. I laughed out loud in my own kitchen when I read it, alone, at 11 at night. $40,000 for everything I have ever made or ever will. Paragraph 9 was a non-disparagement clause. Paragraph 11 said I would not make any public statement regarding the origin, development, authorship, or history of any recipe, product, or brand element. They did not want the recipes. They already had the recipes. They had been selling them for 4 years. They wanted my silence, and they wanted it in writing, and they wanted it before somebody else's lawyers asked a question that had a bad answer. I read paragraph 11 4 times. And I thought, with a clarity that arrived from nowhere and has never entirely left me since, they are not doing this because they are strong. I found Odile Sarot through a woman in my bread guild, whose ex-husband is a musician. That sounds like a joke, and it is not. Musicians and cooks have the same problem, which is that they make something out of nothing, and then somebody with a better lawyer explains to them why it was never theirs. Odile has spent 31 years doing copyright and trademark work for people who make things with their hands and their heads and no capital. Her office is 2 rooms above a guitar shop. She is 60-something, wears reading glasses pushed up into gray hair that has clearly been cut by her own hand, and she read the 11-page assignment without saying a word, all the way through, twice. Then she took the glasses off. "Do not sign this," she said. "I wasn't going to." "Good, now tell me why they sent it." "Because there's a sale." "Yes, and..." I thought about it. "Because they can't give a clean representation about who made the recipes." "Better," Odile said, but still nodded. She leaned forward. "They sent you this because somebody in a due diligence meeting asked a question, and the answer made a room full of expensive people uncomfortable, and now there is a note in a file somewhere that says Resolve Halloway. You are not a person to them right now, MS. Halloway. You are an open item on a checklist, and there is a closing date." She let that sit. "Which means," she said, "for the first time in your life with respect to your sister, you have a clock. And it is not your clock, it is theirs." I sat in that office above a guitar shop, and something reorganized itself in my chest. "What do I actually have?" I said, legally, honestly, not what I wish I had. And Odile Sarot said, "That is the first intelligent question anybody has asked me this month. Let's find out. It's going to be less than you think in one direction and much more than you think in another, and the second part is the part they are afraid of." I have been unfair to the good years, and I want to correct it, because a betrayal only weighs what the thing it broke weighed. And if I let you think we were always like this, then none of it costs anything. From about 2013 to about 2019, my sister and I ran a bakery together, and we were very good at it. The division was not imposed on us. We found it, the way you find a way of carrying a table with somebody. She could not bake. I do not mean she was mediocre, I mean she had no feel for it at all. She was the only person I have ever taught who got worse under pressure. And I could not talk to people. I do not mean I was shy. I mean that when a customer asked me a friendly question about my weekend, I would answer it factually, and at length, and watch their face close. So she stood at the front, and I stood at the back, and the whole building worked. There was a system we had for the Saturday morning rush, which is the single most dangerous 90 minutes in that business. She would call orders back over the pass in a shorthand we invented, and I would answer with a number, and to anyone listening it sounded like 2 people arguing in code. 6 not to mourn. 9. 9. 9. Take the ones on the left, the right side is short. There is a thing that happens between 2 people who work like that. It is not friendship exactly. It is closer to being able to hear somebody else's hands. In 2016, the freezer compressor died on a Friday night in July with $1,100 of butter in it. We drove to 3 different restaurants at midnight, borrowed walk-in space from all of them, and moved everything in her hatchback in 4 trips. And at 4 in the morning, we sat on the loading dock in the dark eating a broken pain au chocolat, and she said, "If this place burns down, I will be relieved." And I said, "If this place burns down, I will be inside it." And she laughed so hard she got hiccups. In 2017, our father's anniversary fell on a Sunday, and we closed the shop, which we never do, and drove out to the cemetery. And she brought a folding chair because I cannot kneel on that ground for long since a herniated disc in 2015, and she carried it the whole way from the car without being asked, and without making a thing of it. That is my sister. All of that is my sister. She is not a woman who stole recipes. She is a woman who carried a folding chair across a cemetery for me and also stole recipes, and I have spent 2 years failing to make those into one person. And I have finally accepted that failing is the correct outcome because they are one person, and people are not consistent, and the ones who hurt you are almost never doing it in every room of their lives. The social media, started as a joke in 2015. She filmed me shaping. She did not put my face in it at my request, just my hands and the bench, and she talked over it, and it was funny, and 11,000 people watched it in a week, and we thought that was the most absurd thing that had ever happened to anyone. We used to plan the videos together on the bench by the loading door. She would say what would people want to see, and I would say nobody wants to see this. It is just work. And she would say, Greta, that is exactly what they want to see. She was right. She was right about all of it. Every single instinct she had about what an audience wants was correct, and mine were all wrong. That is a thing I have to keep saying because there is a version of this story where I am the talent and she is the parasite, and that version is a lie that would be very comfortable for me. She built the audience. I could not have built it in 9 lifetimes. What she built was real, and it was hers. The problem was never that she took credit for the audience. The problem is that at some point the audience became the asset, and once the audience is the asset, the story of where it came from becomes part of the asset, and a story with 2 people in it is worth less than a story with 1. Nobody decided that. That is what I want to say. There was no meeting. It is simply that every time the story got told, it got slightly simpler, because simpler is what travels, and after 400 tellings the version that survived was the one with 1 woman in it. The book launch was the 12th of October, 2022, in a bookstore downtown that smelled like new carpet, and I want to tell you about it properly because it is the hinge of the entire thing, and I have never told anybody all of it. I closed the shop early. I have closed the shop early 4 times in 19 years. There were maybe 200 people. There was wine in plastic cups. There was a woman with a headset who kept asking people to form a line against the shelves. Camille was luminous. That is the only word. She read the chapter about our grandmother, the one that made me cry in a Target parking lot, and she read it well, and she cried a little at the same place I had, and 200 people went absolutely silent in a bookstore. Then she did questions, and then she signed for an hour and 40 minutes. I stood at the back near the travel section with a plastic cup, and I was proud of her. I want that on the record. I was so proud of her that my chest hurt. And a woman about my age came and stood next to me and said, "Are you a fan?" And I said, "That's my sister." And she said, "Oh, how wonderful. Do you bake too?" And I said, "A little." I said a little. I have gone over this moment more times than any other moment in my life, including the one in the walk-in cooler, and I want to be precise about why, because the obvious reading is that I was humiliated and could not say it, and that is not what happened. What happened is that I looked at the front of the room, at my sister mid-sentence with her hand on a stranger's arm, having the best night of her life, and I did a calculation I had done 10,000 times without ever once noticing it. I calculated that if I said the true sentence, which is I wrote 11 of the recipes in that book, this woman would say something kind, and then perhaps say something to somebody else, and it would move through the room, and at some point in the next 40 minutes it would reach the front, and Camille would find out that I had said it on her night. And it would cost her something. So I said a little, and the woman said how lovely and moved off, and I stood there in the travel section and drank my wine. That is the entire mechanism, right there. Not fear, not cowardice, not even really generosity. A reflex 30 years deep that runs a cost calculation in about a quarter of a second and always assigns the cost to me because I am the one who can carry it. You were the steady one. I got a taxi home at 10 because I had to be at the bakery at 4. Camille went on to a thing at a hotel bar with the publisher. She texted me at 1 in the morning. "Where did you go?" I looked up and you were gone. I texted back, "Early start. So proud of you, it was perfect." And it was true. Every word of that was true, which is the part I still cannot fully get my arms around. 6 weeks before that, the spreadsheet. An assistant I never met, a young man called Devin, emailed me a document with 42 rows in it and asked me to verify the technical details were highlighted. 11 rows were highlighted. 11 rows were mine. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine, and I went through them one at a time, and I fixed 9 errors. The morning bun was listed at 68% hydration. It is 72 in winter and 70 in summer, and at 68 it will be tight and dry, and every person who makes it will think they did something wrong. I fixed it. The cardamom knot had the butter going in at the wrong stage, which would have broken the dough. I fixed it. The olive loaf had a bake temperature that would have been correct in a deck oven and was wrong for a home oven by about 30 degrees, and I wrote a note in the margin of the spreadsheet explaining why and how to adjust, and the note was 200 words long, and I wrote it at midnight, for free, for a book with somebody else's name on it. Devin wrote back, "This is so helpful, thank you." And here is the thing I did not understand, until Odile Sarraut explained it to me in a room above a guitar shop 4 years later. That spreadsheet is the best evidence in the entire case. It is dated. It is contemporaneous. It contains my corrections, in my words, on 11 specific recipes, 6 weeks before publication. It proves, beyond any argument anybody could construct, that in 2022 the company knew exactly who to ask about those 11 recipes, and that the answer was me. Their entire defense was that authorship was a muddle between two sisters. I had emailed them the correct hydration percentage at midnight, and they had thanked me with 2 exclamation marks. "This is what I mean," Odile said when I brought it in. "Every single act of self-erasure you performed over 19 years, they performed with you, and every one of those is a document with a date on it. MS. Halloway, you were not silent. You were extremely helpful in writing repeatedly, and helpfulness leaves a trail." It took Odile Sarraut 9 days to tell me what I had, and she made me sit through all of it, including the bad parts, which she delivered first on purpose. The bad parts. A recipe, as a list of ingredients and bare functional steps, is not protected. Anyone can bake my morning bun and sell it and call it theirs, and there is nothing on this earth I can do about it. That is settled, and it is not close. The techniques are not protected. Lamination is not mine. Retarding a dough is not mine. The name Halloway's is a family name on a building, and my sister has as much claim to it as I do. And worst, I had known about the book since 2022, and I had helped, and a court would want to know why a woman who watched 11 of her recipes go out under somebody else's name in 2022 said nothing until 2026. There is a doctrine for that. It is called lashes, and it means, roughly, you cannot sleep on your rights and then wake up when it becomes profitable. "That's the case against you," Odile said. "I want you to hold all of it in your hands before I show you the other side, because if you go into this thinking you are obviously right, you will be destroyed by the first competent person who disagrees with you." "Okay." Now, she pulled a legal pad over. "Here is what you actually have. There are 4 things, and they are not the 4 things you think." The first thing was the notebooks, and not for the reason I assumed. I had thought of them as proof. Odile corrected me. "They are not proof of ownership," she said. "They are proof of authorship, which is different and much more dangerous to them. And more than that, they are the only contemporaneous record in this entire dispute. Do you understand what that means?" "Not really." "It means that when 2 people tell a story about 2007, one of them is remembering and one of them is reading." She tapped the pad. "Your sister told a national audience that she taught herself at 19. There is a notebook, dated, in your handwriting with flower lot numbers in it from that period, and it says otherwise on every page. She has a memory. You have an archive. Those are not the same weight, and no lawyer alive would tell you otherwise." The second thing was the copyright, and here Odile got precise in a way that mattered. "The recipes are not protected, but the notebooks are. Not the ingredient lists, the text around them. 19 years of written observation, in my own words, unpublished, is a body of literary work, and it is mine automatically from the moment it was fixed on the page, and I have every one of the originals in a storage unit. And 11 recipes in Camille's book have headnotes, method text, and phrasing in them that came out of that archive. Substantial similarity of expression, Odile said. That's the phrase. It's thin, like your first lawyer told you. But thin is not nothing, and thin against a company that is trying to close a transaction in 9 weeks is not thin at all. It's a hand grenade. The third thing was the trademark, and this was the one that made me put my coffee down. In 2016, a woman came into the bakery selling brand services, and I paid her $1,100, which at the time was a lot of money to me, to file a trademark application. I did it because a place 2 towns over had started calling itself Halloway's with no apostrophe, and I was frightened. I filed it, I got the certificate, I put it in a drawer, and I forgot about it for a decade. Registration owner: Gretchen A. Halloway, an individual, not the LLC, not Hale Brands. Say that again, I said. You own the mark, Odile said. Personally. Registered in continuous use, with a decade of priority over anything Hale Brands has filed. She turned her screen around, and here is their filing. Hale Brands filed for Halloway's Kitchen in 2023 in 3 classes, and the examiner suspended it pending prior registration. And I would bet you the contents of my office that nobody ever told your sister what that suspension actually meant. Because to a founder, a suspension letter looks like paperwork. I looked at that screen for a long time. So the frozen dough line, I said, is being sold under a mark you own. And the acquisition is an acquisition of a brand, Odile said, whose brand name belongs to a woman in a bakery who has not been told she is anyone. And the fourth thing was the one I had actually brought her, the one I had been carrying since March like a stone in a coat pocket, and I had not understood at all what it was worth. The television clip, Odile said. Do you understand what she did in Atlanta? She lied. She made a public statement, on the record, about the provenance of the asset her company is currently selling. Odile smiled for the first time in 9 days, and it was not a nice smile. MS. Halloway, the acquirer's lawyers, watch that footage. It is publicity. It's in the marketing pack. She stood up in front of 300 people and told a story about authorship. And in 9 weeks, a very serious firm is going to hand your sister a representation letter and ask her to sign it under penalty. And it will say that everything she has told the public about this brand is true and complete. I sat there in a chair above a guitar shop. She can't sign it, I said. She can, Odile said. People do. But she would be signing it while a woman with 41 dated notebooks and a registered trademark is standing outside the building. And her lawyers know that. That is why they called you first. I want to say something here about how it felt, because if I only tell you the mechanics you will think I was cold about it, and I was not. I went home from Odile's office that day, and I did not feel triumphant. I made dinner. Theo asked how it went, and I said fine, and then in the middle of washing a pan, I started crying so hard I had to hold the edge of the sink. Because the whole time she was talking, the only thing I could think about was Camille at 11 years old, sitting on the flour sacks at 5 in the morning in her pajamas because she could not sleep, watching me shape rolls, asking me questions about everything, absolutely everything. Why does it spring back? Why is that one flat? And me answering all of it delighted, because for 1 hour before school somebody thought I was interesting. That is who she is to me. She has never stopped being that, even now, even after Atlanta. And what Odile had just handed me was a set of instruments for taking my sister apart. Theo dried his hands and stood next to me and did not say anything for a while, and then he said, "You know you don't have to use all of it." I know. Do you? No, I said. Camille called me 11 days later, and it was the first time we had spoken since February. Gret, warm, delighted, as if we had talked on Sunday. "Oh my God, it's been insane. Have you been okay? Mom said you sounded weird." I had a legal pad in front of me. I had written the date at the top the way I have written the date at the top of a page every working day for 19 years. "I've been fine," I said. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something, and I want to do it right, not over the phone. Can I come by the shop, like tomorrow?" "You can come by the shop." "Okay, good," a pause. "Greta, are you mad at me?" And there it was, the thing she does. She has done it since she was 6 years old, and it has never once failed. She asks you directly, in a small voice, whether you are angry, and it puts the entire weight of the interaction on you, because now if you say yes, you are the one making it a thing. "I watch the show," I said. "What show?" I let the silence sit. "The Atlanta thing," she said. "Oh God, that host was such a nightmare. I was so off that day." "You said there was no one else." That's not what I. Greta, that's a soundbite. That's 40 minutes cut down to 11. You have no idea what they do in the edit. You told my Lion story, I said. And I heard my sister stop breathing. I want to be clear about what I had just done, because I did not plan it, and it was the single most useful accident of the entire year. I had not mentioned Lion. Lion was not in the television clip. Lion was a thing I had told her once in 2009, on a bench by the loading door, when I told her about the program I had applied to at 19 and never heard back from, and how I had sat on the kitchen floor at 3 in the morning after the 406th attempt at the morning bun and thought, well, at least I taught myself something. She had taken the shape of that and put it on television. But I had said the word Lion, and my sister, who had no reason on this earth to react to the word Lion, had stopped breathing. I'll come tomorrow, she said and hung up. I sat looking at the phone. Then I wrote on the legal pad, in handwriting that came out strange. She knows something about Lion. She came at 4 the next afternoon, in the gap between the second bake and close, which is the only hour that building is ever quiet. She looked wonderful. She always looks wonderful. But she had lost weight in a way that did not read as health, and there was something in the way she stood inside the doorway, not quite coming in like a customer. It still smells the same, she said. It does. I dream about that smell. That is not a line, I actually do. She put her bag down on the bench by the loading door. Our bench. Can we sit? We sat. And she did the whole thing, and it was beautiful. And I have to tell you that even knowing everything I knew, sitting there with a storage unit full of notebooks across town, part of me was moved because she meant it. That is the thing I cannot make anybody understand about my sister. She meant every word while she was saying it. She said she was sorry about Atlanta. She said the machine around her had gotten enormous, and she did not always recognize what came out of it. She said she thought about me every day. She said, and here she started to cry, that she had never once in her life felt like she had earned anything, and that when people applauded she felt like a coat rack wearing somebody else's coat. Then she wiped her face and said, there's a deal. It's big, Gret. It's really big. And there's a piece of paper my lawyers need you to sign, and I hate that they contacted you before I did. I found out after and I lost my mind at them. $40,000, I said. That's a placeholder. That number is a placeholder. I will fix that number. She leaned forward and took my hands, and her hands were freezing. Ask me for what you want. I mean it. Name it. And I looked at my sister, who was holding my hands and crying and offering me money in the room where I have worked for 19 years. And I asked her the only question I actually wanted the answer to. Cam, I said, what happened with Lion? She let go of my hands. I don't know what that means, she said. Yes, you do. Greta, I have a car coming at 5. You stopped breathing on the phone. She stood up. She picked up her bag, and she was not crying anymore. And for 1 second, one single second, I saw something cross my sister's face that I had never seen there before in 42 years. It was not guilt. Guilt I would have recognized. It was fear. Sign the paper, she said. Please. For once in your life, Greta, just take the good thing and don't turn it into an investigation. She left. The car was at 5. It was 4:40. The Lion program is called the Institut Bocuse Formation, and it still exists, and it still keeps records. And it took me 4 emails and 1 phone call at 6 in the morning our time to a woman named Arian in an admissions office who was under no obligation to help me at all. I told her the truth, which is generally the fastest route with strangers. I said I applied in 2003. I never heard back, and 23 years later I would like to know whether I was rejected, because it turns out I have organized quite a lot of my life around the answer. She was quiet, and then she said, Madam, hold please, in the tone of a woman who has decided to break a small rule. She came back after 9 minutes. Holloway, Gretchen, October 2003. I heard a keyboard. You were offered a place. Conditional scholarship, partial 40%. Offer letter sent 14 January 2004. A pause. Withdrawn 3 March 2004, non-response. I sat down on my own kitchen floor, with the phone against my ear. Withdrawn for non-response, I said. We send twice. There is a second letter. Then if there is nothing, the place goes to the waiting list. Her voice softened. Madam, do you want the address the letters were sent to? Yes. It was my parents' house on Delancey Road. Of course it was. I lived there. I was 19. Is there a name on the file? I said, for correspondence. Anyone who called. More typing. Then Arian said, there is one note. 6 February 2004. A telephone call is recorded. The note says, in French, mother of candidate telephone to say candidate declines the place. I want to describe what that did, but I am not sure I can do it properly. It was not a shock. That is the strange part. It was the opposite of a shock. It was the feeling of a bone that has been out of its socket for 22 years going back in. There is a sound in your head. Everything in the room stays exactly where it is, and every single thing about it is different. My mother had answered the telephone in the kitchen on Delancey Road in February 2004, and she had told a woman in France that her 19-year-old daughter did not want the thing she wanted most in the world, and then she had hung up and made dinner. And I had spent 22 years believing I was not good enough. I did not confront her. I want to explain why, because it looks like cowardice, and it was actually the first genuinely strategic thing I did in my life. I went to see her on a Sunday with a bag of the cardamom knots she likes, and I asked her about 2004. Not about Lyon, about 2004 generally, what it had been like, Dad's business, money. And my mother, who is 74 and lonely, and had a captive audience for the first time in months, talked for 2 hours. She told me that 2004 was the worst year of their marriage, that the bakery lost money for 14 straight months, that my father was drinking, that she had lain awake doing arithmetic about the mortgage. And then, without any prompting from me at all, she said, that was the year Camille got so wild. You remember. I remember. 15 years old and out until 3 in the morning, and your father useless, and I could not. She stopped. She smoothed the tablecloth with the flat of her hand. I could not do it alone, Greta. The kitchen was very quiet. So you kept me home, I said. And my mother, still smoothing the tablecloth, said, you were the steady one. There it was, not a denial, not a confession either. Just the load-bearing sentence of my entire life, said out loud at last by the person who installed it. You were the steady one. I did not say the word Lyon. I put the knots on a plate and made tea and stayed 40 more minutes and drove home, and on the highway I had to pull onto the shoulder because I could not see. Here is why I did not confront her, and I want to be honest that it is not a noble reason. Because she would have told Camille. Odile's strategy meeting was the following Tuesday, and I brought her the Lyon file, and she read it, and then set it aside with a kind of care. I am very sorry, she said. That is a genuinely terrible thing to learn. Is it useful? To your case? Not remotely. She took her glasses off. It has no legal relevance whatsoever. It is not evidence of anything that is in dispute. If you tried to put it in front of a tribunal, they would stop you before the second sentence. Then, why do I feel like it's the most important thing I've found? Because it is, Odile said. It is the most important thing you have found, and it is worth nothing to the case, and you need to be able to hold both of those at once, or you will make a very expensive mistake. She leaned back. MS. Holloway, listen to me. Every client I have ever lost, I lost because at some point they stopped trying to win and started trying to be understood. Those are different projects. The second one cannot be done in a legal proceeding. Not ever. Not once. Not by anybody. I have thought about that sentence more than almost anything else anyone said to me that year. So what do? We do the boring, precise, aggressive thing, she said, and pulled the pad over. 3 moves, all this week. Move 1. A letter to Hale Brands Counsel, copied to nobody, stating that Gretchen A. Holloway is the registered owner of United States trademark registration number so-and-so, that she has not licensed it, and requesting confirmation of the basis on which the mark is being used in commerce by Hale Brands. Not a demand, Odile said. A question. Demands are answered by litigators. Questions are answered by the people who have to file the disclosure schedule. Move 2. A copyright registration. 41 notebooks registered as an unpublished collection. You already own the copyright. It exists automatically, she said. But registration gets you statutory damages and attorney's fees, and more to the point, it puts a government record with a date on it into the world. It costs $65. It is the best $65 anybody in this dispute will spend. Move 3, and this was the one I did not expect at all. Nothing, Odile said. Nothing. You do not contact your sister. You do not respond to MS Raghunathan except through me. You do not post, you do not tell your bread guild, you do not say one word in public. She fixed me with a look. You have spent your whole life being the reasonable one who explains herself. For the next 6 weeks, you are going to be silent, and the silence is going to do more work than anything you could say. Because there is a closing date, and every day you do not sign, somebody in a conference room has to explain why. I did the 3 things, and then a 4th thing happened that nobody planned. Beatriz Ocampo has worked in that bakery since 2009. She runs the front, she trains everyone, and she has a memory like a court stenographer. On a Thursday in May, she came into the back office and closed the door, which she has done perhaps 4 times in 17 years. They called me, she said. Who called you? A woman, very nice, from a company doing background verification for a media project. Beatriz folded her arms. She asked me how long Camille worked in the kitchen. She asked whether I had ever seen Camille develop recipes. She asked whether you and Camille worked on them together. What did you say? I said I would need to check with my employer before answering questions about the business. She raised her eyebrows very slightly. She got less nice. I sat back in the chair. They were building a record. Somebody at the other end had understood that this was going to come down to who could put a person in a room in 2007, and they had started calling my staff before I had even answered their letter. Beatriz, I said, I have to tell you what's happening, and then you can decide what you want to do, and either way your job is safe. I told her all of it. It took an hour. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Greta, can I say something you will not like? Yes. Everybody who has ever worked in this building knows what she did. She said it flatly. All of us. For years. We used to talk about it in the alley. And every single one of us was waiting for you to say something, and you never did. And after a while, some of the newer ones started to believe her version, because why would she be lying if you weren't correcting her? I had no answer for that. I am not blaming you, Beatriz said. I am telling you that your silence had a cost that you did not pay. We paid it. Emilio quit in 2023 because he could not stand it. The response came from Priya Raghunathan on a Friday afternoon in late May, and it was 4 pages long, and it was not a question. It said that Hale Brands disputed any suggestion of unauthorized use, that the mark had been used with the knowledge and acquiescence of the registrant for a period of years, that the registrant had actively participated in the development of the branded works, and that any claim was barred by lashes, estoppel, and implied license. Implied license. That is the argument that because I helped and said nothing and fixed their hydration percentages at 11 at night, I had effectively given permission. The last page said that Hale Brands reserved all rights, including with respect to the company's contribution to the goodwill and commercial value of the retail location, and any claim arising from the Halloway's Bakery LLC operating agreement. Odile read that paragraph twice. There it is, she said. What? They just told you what they're going to do. She set the letter down. Your sister owns 40% of your bakery. If you press this, they will move to dissolve the LLC and force a sale of the business to pay out her interest. I looked at her. They'd close the bakery, I said, to win an argument about recipes. They would close the bakery, Odile said, to remove an open item from a checklist before a closing date. MS. Halloway, I need you to hear the difference. Nobody over there hates you. That is what makes them dangerous. If they hated you, they would be sloppy. Marisol Vega found me, which is not how I would have written it. An email came into the bakery's general inbox on the last day of June, the week after the dissolution petition landed, from an address that was a first initial and a surname and a number. It said, in its entirety, I worked at Hale Brands 2021-2023. I saw the trade rumor. I can't talk to you. I'm sorry. I wanted you to know that I know. I read it about 40 times. Then I did the thing you are not supposed to do, which is that I wrote back myself, without asking Odile, at 11 at night. I said, I understand you can't talk to me. Can I ask you one question that you don't have to answer? Did somebody at that company do to you what they did to me? She wrote back at 6 the next morning, yes, and I signed. And I have thought about it every single day for 2 years. Odile made me stop immediately. Do not answer that, she said. Do not send another word. You are one email away from being accused of inducing a breach of contract, and that is a real claim, and it is the kind of claim that gets filed to make you go away. She reached out to me. It does not matter. Odile put her glasses on the desk. MS, Halloway. Listen to what she told you. She signed. That means there is a document, and that document says she cannot discuss the circumstances of her employment or the development of any product. If she talks to you, she is exposed, not you. And if she is exposed and she has a mortgage, she will stop talking, and then you will have burned her for nothing. So we do nothing. We do something, Odile said, but we do it in a way that costs her nothing. She pulled the pad over. Wendell. Public sources only. Find out who she is when she was there and what shipped under her tenure, and do not contact her. Wendell Ashby took 9 days. Marisol Vega, 36. Culinary Institute, then 8 years in restaurant development, then Hale Brands from March 2021 to August 2023, title Senior Manager of Product Development. Departure not announced. Her name appears in exactly one place in any Hale Brands material, an acknowledgements page in a list of 11 people under the heading with thanks to the team. And during her 29 months there, the company launched 14 products. 14, Wendell said. 2 of them are Greta's. What are the other 12? That was the question that changed the temperature of the whole thing. Because I had been thinking about this from March until the end of June as a family matter. A sister who took her sister's recipes, ugly and private and ours. 12 products in 29 months is not a family matter. 12 products in 29 months is a machine that requires a steady input of somebody else's work. There's a pattern, Odile said, when I said it out loud. I have suspected it since June, and I did not want to say it before you had a reason to believe me. MS. Halloway, companies that are comfortable doing this to a stranger have generally practiced on somebody. And companies that are comfortable doing it to a founder's sister have generally got very good at it. It changed what the third demand meant. I want to be honest that until that week, my refusal of the confidentiality clause was about me. It was about my own account of my own life. That is a legitimate thing to want, and it is what I told Judge Alvarez in September, and it was true. But it stopped being only that in the last week of June, and the reason is a woman I have never met who wrote me 11 words at 6 in the morning. I have thought about her a great deal. I do not know what happened to her. I know she developed products for 29 months at a company whose entire public story is that one woman does everything herself. And I know she left with no announcement, and I know she signed something, and I know that 2 years later she was awake at 6 in the morning writing to a stranger to say I know, because it had not stopped mattering. That is what those clauses actually do. Everybody talks about them as though they are about protecting trade secrets. They are not. There are no trade secrets in a cardamom knot. What they protect is the story, and the way they protect it is by taking a person who was in the room and making it expensive for her to say she was in the room. And the cruelty of it, the specific cruelty, is that it does not just silence her. It makes every other person who was in the room think they are the only one. I was standing in a bakery in March believing I was the only one. She was awake at 6 in the morning believing she was the only one. There were probably others. That is not a family matter. That is a design. I did one thing with it, and it was legal, and it was Odile's idea, and it was so restrained that I did not understand at the time how sharp it was. We did not contact Marisol Vega. We never have. But in the July letter, the polite one that went out with the 4 exhibits, Odile added a single sentence in the second to last paragraph. It said, We note that the company's public account of the origin of the recipe portfolio does not appear to accommodate the contributions of its own product development staff during the relevant period, and we assume any representations made to the acquirer have been prepared with that in mind. That is all, one sentence. No name, no accusation, nothing anybody could sue over. What does that do? I asked her. On its own, almost nothing, Odile said. But it will be read by a lawyer at the acquirer who has spent 4 weeks being told that this is a squabble between two sisters. And it will make her ask a question she has not asked yet, which is, how many other people are there? She capped the pen. And nobody at Hale Brands will be able to answer it quickly, because answering it means going through 29 months of product development files with a person who knows what they are looking for. She was right. Of course she was right. I found out much later, from a throwaway remark of Priya Raghunathan's in the corridor at the mediation, that the sentence about product development staff cost them 11 days and a document review, and that it was the single line in the letter that their own client could not explain to them. I never wrote back to Marisol Vega. I want to end this part honestly. I have started the email perhaps 20 times. There is a version in my drafts folder that has been there for 19 months. It says thank you, and it says I'm sorry, and it says you were not the only one, and it says a lot of things about what her 11 words did. I have not sent it, because sending it might cost her something, and there is no version where it does not, and I have decided that the thing I owe her is not a message. It is that I did not sign the clause. She will never know that. She will never know that a woman she emailed once at 6 in the morning sat in a room on the 19th floor in September and gave up $70,000 in part because of 11 words from a stranger. And I have made my peace with her never knowing, because the alternative, the version where I tell her so that she knows and so that I get to be somebody who did a good thing, is about me again. I have spent a year learning to notice the difference, and I am still not particularly good at it. But the 900 words got published. And 2 years from now, if she reads them, there is a paragraph in there about a company and a pattern and a number of products in a number of months. She will know what it is. She was in the room. June was the month they took it apart. I want to lay it out in order, because at the time it did not feel like a sequence. It felt like weather. It was only afterward, reading my own legal pad, that I could see that every single thing that happened in June happened in a logical order, and that somebody competent had decided that order in a room. June the 3rd. Our flour supplier, a family company we have bought from since 1994, informed me that our terms were changing from net 30 to payment on delivery. No explanation. When I called, the man I have spoken to for 11 years would not come to the phone. June the 9th. A woman from a hospitality trade publication emailed asking for comment on reports that Halloway's Bakery is facing a partnership dispute. I had told nobody. Odile had told nobody. There were no reports. June the 14th. The landlord of the building next door, where we rent the small second unit that holds our dry storage, informed me that the space had been leased to another tenant effective September, despite my having a verbal understanding of 5 years standing and no written lease, because I am a fool who has done business on handshakes with people I grew up with. June the 20th. My mother called and cried on the phone for 11 minutes about how her daughters were destroying the family, and how she could not sleep, and how her blood pressure was frightening her doctor, and asked me to please just sign the paper. And then she said, "Camille says you've been calling people in France." I stood very still in my own kitchen. I had told exactly one person about Lyon. I had told Odile Sarraut, who is bound by privilege and who I would trust with my life. And I had asked a woman named Ariane in an admissions office in France for a copy of a file, and had given her so she could verify my identity, my date of birth, and my mother's name. "Mom," I said, "who told Camille that?" And my mother said, "What does it matter?" And I understood that somebody in France had made a courtesy call to the contact on file, which was a landline on Delancey Road, and that my mother had taken that call and had immediately telephoned my sister. 22 years later, the same telephone, the same two people doing the same thing. June the 26th was the worst day, and I will tell it plainly. The petition was filed in the morning. Camille R. Halloway, as a 40% member of Halloway's Bakery LLC, sought judicial dissolution of the company on the grounds that it was no longer reasonably practicable to carry on the business in conformity with the operating agreement, citing a complete breakdown in the relationship between the members and the majority members' diversion of company resources to personal litigation. Diversion of company resources. That was the $65 I spent registering my own notebooks and Odile's retainer, which I had paid out of the business account because it was a business dispute, on the advice of my accountant in April. I had done it in writing. I had emailed my accountant and asked whether that was appropriate, and he had said yes. It did not matter that it was defensible. It mattered that it existed. At 2 in the afternoon, Beatriz came and got me, because there was a man at the front counter with an envelope. At 4, Priya Raghunathan's office sent a revised proposal. It was the original assignment, plus a dismissal of the dissolution petition, plus Camille's 40% transferred to me for $1, plus $180,000. Paragraph 11 was still in it. The silence clause, word for word, unchanged. They had taken everything else off the table and left the only thing they actually wanted. At 6, I drove to Odile's office without an appointment, and she was still there, and she took one look at me and made coffee and did not say anything for a while. They can do this, I said finally. They can file it. Whether they win it is a different question, and I would say they probably do not. How long? 14 months, perhaps 18. And what happens to the bakery for 18 months, while 2 owners are in litigation over whether it should exist? Odile did not insult me by softening it. It becomes very difficult to run, she said. Suppliers get nervous. Staff get nervous. You spend your Tuesdays in depositions instead of in your kitchen. I sat there. $180,000 and the whole company, I said. And all I have to do is never say out loud who made the morning bun. Yes, that's a good deal. On paper, Odile said, it is an extremely good deal. It is more money than the claim is likely to be worth after fees, and it removes every risk you have. You think I should take it? And Odile Sarraut, who bills by the hour and had nothing at all to gain by saying it, said, I think you should understand exactly what you are buying with it, and that it is not the bakery. You already have the bakery. What you would be buying is the end of the fear, and that is a real thing, and people are entitled to buy it. She looked at me steadily. But you would be selling the only account of your own life, not the recipes, the account, and there is no clause in that document that lets you buy it back. I went home and I did not tell Theo, and he found the papers on the table at 11 at night because I left them there, which I suppose was its own kind of telling. He read them, he put them down. He said, what do you want to do? I want to take it. Okay. I looked up at him. That's it, okay. Greta, he sat down across from me. You have been carrying this family since you were 19 years old. If you want to put it down, put it down. I am not going to be one more person in your life with an opinion about what you owe. And that, more than anything anyone said to me that whole year, is why I did not sign. Because for the first time in my life, somebody had handed me a decision with nothing attached to it. No reason, no gentle pressure, no be gentle with her, no you were the steady one. Just, it's yours, do what you want. And when the weight came off, I found that what I actually wanted, underneath 30 years of being reasonable, was not money and was not the company and was not even an apology. I wanted the record to say what happened. That is all. That is the whole of it. I wanted it written down somewhere that could not be edited, the way I have written down every temperature and every failure for 19 years, because a thing that is not written down can be told any way at all by whoever is holding the microphone. I called Odile at 7 the next morning. I'm not signing paragraph 11, I said. Not for any number, everything else is negotiable. That is not. There was a pause. All right, she said, and I could hear her already reaching for a pen. Then we are going to have to make them need something from us more than we need something from them. Come in at 9. The thing we needed was already sitting in a public database, and had been for 11 weeks. It was Odile's associate, a 29-year-old named Wendell Ashby, who I had barely spoken to, who found it, and I want him named because he is the reason any of this worked. He had been going through Hale Brand's regulatory and public filings looking for the acquirer's identity, which nobody would confirm. He did not find the acquirer. He found something better. In April, 6 weeks after Atlanta, Hale Brands had filed a new trademark application. Not for Halloway's. For a new mark, Inez and Daughters, in 5 classes, covering frozen dough, baking mixes, cookware, printed matter, and television. Inez is my grandmother. The application included, as applications do, a declaration signed under penalty of perjury by an officer of the company stating that to the best of the signatory's knowledge, no other person had the right to use the mark in commerce. It was signed by Camille R. Halloway, and attached to it, as a specimen of use, was a page from the second book. The page contained a recipe. The recipe was mine, not one of the 11 from the first book. A new one. The cardamom knot, which I developed in 2018, which is in Notebook 34, which has 190 dated entries behind it. Do you understand what this is? Wendell said. It's the same theft twice. No, Odile said from the doorway. It is the same theft twice, in writing after they knew you were disputing it, signed under penalty of perjury by your sister personally, 4 weeks after their own counsel opened a file titled Resolve Halloway. She came in and sat on the edge of the desk. MS. Halloway, up to this moment, everything your sister did was arguably a family misunderstanding about credit. That is what their whole defense is built on. Acquiescence. Implied license. A muddle between siblings. She tapped the printout. This is not a muddle. This is a document, and it is dated after the muddle ended. I looked at my sister's signature at the bottom of a federal form. What do we do with it? Nothing dramatic, Odile said. We are going to write them one more letter. It is going to be very polite. It is going to attach this application and the corresponding page of Notebook 34 and the copyright registration certificate, and one sentence noting that we assume the declaration was made without full information. And that does what? That, said Odile Sarraute, lands on the desk of a lawyer at the acquiring company who has to decide whether to put her own name on a diligence memo. And she will not. She capped her pen. You have been trying to win an argument with your sister. Stop. You are not going to win an argument with your sister. You are going to make it impossible for anyone else to keep pretending. The line by line took 4 days, and it happened at a folding table in the back room of an office above a guitar shop. And it is the closest I have ever come to reading my own autopsy. Wendell Ashby had both books, the 41 notebooks in archival boxes, and a system. The premise was simple, and it was the only real legal question in the whole dispute. You cannot copyright a recipe. You can copyright the expression around it. So, does the text in those books, the headnotes and the method language and the small human asides that make a recipe readable, come out of my notebooks? I had assumed the answer was no. I had assumed Devin or somebody had rewritten everything into Camille's voice, and that all they had taken was the underlying facts, which are not protectable, and that this was the weak part of my case. That is not what we found. Notebook 19, page 41, dated the 9th of November 2018. In my handwriting, 3rd attempt at what became the cardamom knot. Dough is overhydrated again, but the knot holds better this way. Don't force the shape. It stops arguing at about the 4th fold, and that's when you know. Second book, page 112, headnote to the cardamom knot. Don't force the shape. The dough stops arguing at about the 4th fold, and that's when you know it's ready. I read it, and then I read it again. And then I put it down and went and stood in the little kitchen at the back of Odile's office for about 5 minutes with my hands on the counter. It is not the theft that got me. I had known about the theft since 2022. It is that it stops arguing as mine. That is not a technical observation. That is a thing I wrote at 11 at night in 2018 in a notebook nobody was ever going to read. Because after 3 attempts, I had started to think of the dough as a person who was in a mood, and I wrote down the way it felt rather than the way it measured, and it was the truest sentence about dough I have ever written. Somebody took it out of a private notebook and printed it under another woman's name, and 240,000 people read it in her voice. Wendell, who is 29 and had been extremely careful with me all week, said, "Are you all right?" Where did they get it? That was the question, because the spreadsheet Devin sent me in 2022 had 42 rows and technical columns. Hydration, temperature, timing. There was no column for headnotes. Nobody had ever asked me for prose, which meant somebody had been in the notebooks. They had, in 2019. It took us another day and a half to establish it, and the proof was mundane in the way that all real proof is mundane. When the first television series was in pre-production in 2019, a researcher had spent 3 days in the bakery. I remembered her. Her name was Alexa, and she was pleasant and thorough, and she photographed everything. And at the time I was delighted because somebody was finally interested in the actual work. She photographed the notebooks, with my permission. I stood there and helped her flatten the pages. I helped her. There is an email in my own sent folder from June 2019 to a production coordinator that says, "No problem at all, the notebooks go back to 2007. Tell her to take whatever's useful. Some of it's illegible even to me. Take whatever's useful." Odile read it and did something with her mouth and then said, carefully, "I want you to hear me on this. That email will be the centerpiece of their defense. It is the best document they have, and it is very, very good for them." I know. Do you want to know why it is still not enough? Yes. Because permission to photograph is not a license to publish, and because the person you gave it to was a television researcher in 2019, and the use was a book in 2022 by a different legal entity that did not exist in 2019. She put the page down, but it is going to be read out loud in a deposition by a hostile lawyer slowly, and you are going to have to sit there while it happens. I want you prepared for that. By the end of the 4 days, we had 31 instances. Not 31 recipes. 31 specific passages of expression, ranging from 4 words to 2 sentences, that appear in my notebooks between 2008 and 2019, and appear again in one of the 2 published books, with the same distinctive phrasing. 9 of them are unmistakable, things nobody would independently write. The one about the dough arguing. A line about the olive loaf where I wrote in 2011 that the crumb should look like something that got wet and dried out twice, which appears in the first book almost verbatim. A note from 2014 about how you can hear a laminated dough is ready, which I wrote after a night when the extractor fan was broken and the room was silent for once, and which is a genuinely odd thing to say about pastry, and which is on page 88 of a book that has sold 240,000 copies. This is the case, Odile said, when Wendell laid the comparison chart out, not the recipes. This, 31 instances of expression with dated originals against a defendant who has publicly claimed sole authorship on television. It's thin, I said. You told me it was thin. It was thin in April, she said. In April you had a grievance and 41 notebooks nobody had compared to anything. Today you have a chart. She looked at it with something close to affection. MS. Holloway, do you know what the most dangerous document in any dispute is? Not a smoking gun. A chart. Because a smoking gun has to be explained once, and a chart has to be explained 31 times in a row by somebody under oath while everybody watches. I want to record what that week did to me, because it was not what I expected, and it was not good. I thought finding proof would feel like relief. It felt like grief, and it took me until about the 3rd day to work out why. For 4 years, I had been telling myself a story in which Camille took some recipes because the machine around her was enormous and hungry, and she had stopped looking closely at what it ate. A story about carelessness. I had built quite a comfortable house inside that story. 31 instances is not carelessness. Somebody read those notebooks. Somebody sat with photographs of my handwriting and pulled the good lines out of them, the human ones, the ones that make a stranger trust a recipe, and moved them into a manuscript. That takes hours. That is a job somebody did, attentively, with care, because those particular sentences were the valuable part. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were worth. That is the part that finished me. Not that they were stolen. That they were correctly valued by somebody for the first time in my life, and the valuing and the taking were the same act. I sat in my car in the parking lot behind a guitar shop on the fourth day, and I did not cry. I called Theo and I said, they knew it was good. And Theo, who is a very intelligent man, said, yes, that's why they took it. And I said, nobody ever told me it was good. And he was quiet for a second, and then he said, I have told you it was good every week for 11 years, and you have never once heard me, because I'm not a person who could take it. The letter went out on a Tuesday in July. It was 2 pages. It attached 4 exhibits, and it did not accuse anybody of anything. 9 days later, the dissolution petition was withdrawn. Nobody told me. I found out because Wendell checks the docket every morning at 8, and he called me at 4 minutes past. And then, for 3 weeks, absolutely nothing happened at all, which I have since learned is what a very large amount of activity looks like from the outside. Odile explained it to me the way you would explain weather to a child. Somewhere in a building I will never enter, a junior lawyer had read our letter and walked it down a corridor. Somewhere a diligence memo had acquired a paragraph. Somewhere a partner had said the sentence that ends transactions, which is not "this is illegal," it is "I'm not comfortable." The acquisition did not collapse. That is the thing people always want, and it is not what happens. It was repriced and restructured, and the recipe portfolio was carved out of it entirely, and a schedule was added requiring Hale Brands to obtain a written license from a third-party rights holder within 120 days. The third-party rights holder was me. You understand what has happened, Odile said. 2 months ago they wanted your signature as a formality. Today their transaction cannot close without it. That is the entire game, and it is now over. Everything from here is price. And Camille. Odile looked at me over the glasses. MS, Halloway, I have been doing this for 31 years. I would guess that at this moment, nobody at that company is returning your sister's calls. She came to the house at 9 at night in August with no warning, and Theo opened the door, and I heard him say, very evenly, I'll be upstairs. Camille had been crying in the car. She had not tried to fix it. We sat in my kitchen, which she had been in perhaps 5 times in 11 years. They've frozen my board seat, she said. I don't know what that means. It means I'm a face. She laughed, awful. It means I have been a face since 2021, and I signed everything they gave me, and I did not read 1 single page of any of it. And now there's a thing called a clawback and a thing called a rep breach, and my own lawyers won't tell me anything because they're not my lawyers. They're the company's lawyers, and I thought. She stopped. I thought they were mine. I did not say anything. I have learned that from a woman above a guitar shop. You did this, Camille said, but there was no heat in it. She said it the way you would say the date. You signed a federal form under penalty of perjury claiming a recipe out of my notebook, I said. In April, after they'd already called me. I didn't read it. I know. That's not our defense, is it? No. She put her face in her hands. And then, still in her hands, she said, ask me about Lyon. The kitchen clock was very loud. I'm asking, I said. There were 2 letters. The first came in January of 2004. My mother took the call in February and told a woman in France that I had declined, and that was hers, and I already knew that. The second letter came in the last week of February. A follow-up, the way Arian told me they always send. Final notice, place will be released. And it did not go to my mother. It came on a Saturday morning, when my mother was at the store, and my father was at the shop, and the only person home was a 15-year-old girl who was supposed to be at school and was not. Camille told it in a flat voice with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the table, and she told it in order, without excusing any of it, and it was the first time in my entire life I had watched my sister say something difficult without also performing it. She said she knew what the envelope was because I had been talking about Lyon for 4 months. She said she stood in the hallway holding it. She said that what she thought, standing there at 15, was not I want to hurt Greta. What she thought was, if she goes, I'm alone with them. That was it. That was the whole reason. Our father was drinking and our mother was doing arithmetic at 3 in the morning and coming apart, and Camille was 15 and wild because being wild got somebody's attention, and the only steady thing in that house was me. She put the letter in the bottom of her school bag. She meant, she said, to give it to me that night. Then it was the next night. Then it was a week. And then the date on it had passed, and it stopped being a thing she was deciding and became a thing she had done. She burned it in the alley behind the bakery in March of 2004. She was 15 years old. And then you were still there, she said, and you never knew. And every year you were still there, and every year it got bigger. I sat in my kitchen and could not speak. You want to know why I took the recipes? She looked up finally, and her face was wrecked. Because I took your life first, Greta, when I was 15. And then I had to be somebody who deserved it. I had to be somebody so big that it made sense. Because if I was just a girl who stole her sister's letter, then I was nothing. I was the worst person who ever lived, so I had to be Connie Hale. I had to be enormous. I had to be worth it. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, a gesture from childhood. That's why the story on television, she said. It isn't that I forgot you were there. I have never once forgotten you were there. It's that I needed it to be true that I made something out of nothing, because the alternative is what I actually am. I want to describe what happened in me, because I have thought about it for a long time, and it was not what I would have predicted. I did not forgive her. I want to be clear. Nothing was forgiven in that kitchen. But something enormous went out of the room, and what went out of it was the question. For 22 years, I had carried a sentence that ran underneath everything, and the sentence was, "You were not good enough." That sentence had been sitting in the foundations of my entire life. It was in the way I ran a business I never chose. It was in why I signed papers without reading them. It was in why I let a woman print 11 of my recipes under her own name, and then stayed up until 11 at night fixing her hydration percentages, so they would not go into the world wrong. I had been good enough. I had been offered the place. A woman on a telephone and a frightened 15-year-old had taken it, and neither of those things had anything to do with whether I was good enough. And I had spent my whole adult life paying interest on a debt that was never mine. That is what she gave me in that kitchen. She did not mean to give me anything, but she gave me that. "Say something," Camille said. "I don't have anything yet. Are you going to destroy me?" And I looked at my sister and I told her the truth, which was, I don't know. She stayed until almost 1 in the morning, and we did not resolve anything. And near the end, in the doorway with her keys in her hand, she said the thing that I have kept. She said, "Do you know what the worst part is? You'd have come back." What? From Lyon, 9 months. She was not crying anymore. She looked exhausted and about 19 years old. You'd have come back and you'd have run the shop anyway, and it would all have gone exactly the same, and you would have had that one thing. And I took it for nothing. I took 9 months from you for nothing, and then I built a company on top of it so I wouldn't have to think about it. She went out to the car. I stood in my own doorway at 1 in the morning in August, and across the street somebody's sprinkler came on, and I thought about a 19-year-old girl in a kitchen on Delancey Road waiting for a letter that was in a school bag 11 feet away. Odile called it correctly, of course. She usually did. I went in the next morning and told her all of it, and she listened with her hands folded. And at the end she said, "None of that is admissible, relevant, or useful." I know. Good, she uncapped her pen. "Now, do you want to change anything about what we are doing?" And I said yes. Because in the night, I had worked out what I actually wanted, and it was not what I had wanted in June, and it was nothing that had been on any piece of paper anybody had sent me. "I want 3 things," I said, "and they're not money." Odile wrote as I talked, and when I finished, she sat back and looked at the pad for a long moment. "These are cheap," she said. "In dollars, these are almost free. Do you understand that they will fight you harder on these than they would on $2 million? Why? Because money comes out of a line item," she said, "and what you are asking for comes out of the story. Nobody in that building cares about the money. It is not their money. But the story is the asset." She capped the pen. "It is the only asset. That is what your sister was actually selling. Can we get them?" 2 of them, probably. Odile almost smiled. The third one is going to cost us everything we have, and it is the one you actually want, and I would very much like to try. Devin Osai Bonsu called the bakery's landline on a Wednesday in August, 11 days after my sister sat in my kitchen and told me about a letter in a school bag. Beatrice put her head into the office and said, "There's a man on line 1 who says he owes you an apology, and he's been trying to work out how to make this call for 4 years." I knew before I picked it up. He is 31. In 2022, he was 27, and he was a freelance recipe editor, paid by the project, and he had been hired by the book packager, not by Hale Brands, which turns out to matter enormously. "MS, Halloway," he said, "I'm the person who sent you the spreadsheet. I remember, you were very polite." "Yeah," a hard breath down the line. "You sent me back a 200-word note about oven temperatures at midnight, and I have thought about it probably once a month since." I sat down. "Why?" "Because I already had the notebook scans," Devin said. "When I emailed you, I'd been working from them for 6 weeks. I didn't need the technical details. I needed a reason to be in contact with you so I could tell my editor you'd been consulted." Here is what he told me over 50 minutes, and I wrote all of it down because that is what I do. The book packager received, in early 2022, a shared drive folder from the production company. It contained the research assets from the 2019 series. Among them were about 1,100 photographs of 41 composition notebooks, shot page by page in a bakery in June 2019 by a researcher named Alexa who had my full and enthusiastic permission. Devin was hired to draft headnotes and method text for 42 recipes. His brief, and this is where I had to ask him to stop and repeat it, was to write in Kami's voice, using the source material. "Whose voice did you think the source material was in?" I asked. "Hers," he said it flatly. "I want to be honest with you, because I've spent 4 years working out what I actually did wrong. Nobody lied to me. Nobody sat me down and said these are Kami's notebooks. I was given a folder of scans of handwritten notebooks by a company making a book about a woman who bakes, and I assumed the handwriting was hers, because why on earth would it be anybody else's? Did you ever ask?" Once, a pause. In April 2022, I emailed my editor and said, "Some of this handwriting looks like more than one person. Do we have a credit situation?" And she wrote back, "Don't worry about it, that's all been handled upstream." "That's all been handled upstream." "That's the sentence," Devin said. "That's the whole sentence. And I was 27, and it was the biggest job I'd ever had, and somebody senior told me it was handled, and I decided that was true, because deciding it was true meant I got to keep the job." He offered me the email chain. I want to be very careful about how I describe what happened next, because it is the part of this story where I came closest to doing something I would not be able to defend. He offered me the April 2022 exchange, his question and the answer. He still had it in a personal archive because he keeps everything, because he is a freelancer and freelancers keep everything. I said, "Can you legally give me that?" "I don't know," Devin said. "I never signed an NDA with the packager. I signed a work for hire agreement about the copyright in what I wrote. Nobody ever told me I couldn't talk about it." "Have you talked to a lawyer?" "I can't afford one." And there it was, on a Wednesday afternoon in August, in the back office of a bakery. A man with no lawyer, no NDA that he knew of, and a document that would have finished the argument in about 4 minutes, offering it to me because he had been carrying it for 4 years and wanted to put it down. I could have said yes. He would have sent it inside a minute. I said, "Devin, don't send me anything. Not today. Not until you've talked to somebody." "I want to." "I know. That's why I'm saying it." I was surprised by how steady my voice was. "You've been carrying this since 2022 and you want to put it down, and I am the person it would feel best to hand it to, and that's exactly why you shouldn't do it on a phone call with no advice. I've spent 19 years doing what felt best in the moment for somebody else. It costs more than you think." There was a long silence on the line. "That's not the reaction I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Honestly, I expected you to be so angry that you'd take it and not ask. Odile arranged for a colleague, a woman who does employment work 3 floors down, to talk to Devon for an hour at no charge. I never asked what was said. That was the point. 9 days later, the email came through her, not him, with a covering note confirming he had received independent advice and was providing it voluntarily. Odile read it and set it down and said, "Handled upstream." Is it as good as I think? It is better and worse. She took her glasses off. Better, because it establishes that the question of dual authorship was raised inside the process in April 2022 and was closed by somebody senior, which destroys the innocent muddle defense completely. Worse, because we cannot use it the way you want to use it. Why not? Because it names an editor at a packaging company who is not a party to anything, who was probably repeating what she had been told by somebody else, and who has 2 children and a job. Odile tapped the page. If we attach this to a letter, that woman's career is over by Friday. She is the 7th most responsible person in this chain, and she will absorb 100% of it, because she is the one whose name is on the sentence. I sat with that. So what do? We tell them we have it, Odile said. That is all. In the letter that goes out before the mediation, one line, we are in possession of contemporaneous correspondence from April 2022 in which the question of authorship was raised internally and resolved without reference to our client. No name, no attachment, no quote. And if they call the bluff? It is not a bluff, she said. That is why it works. I have gone back and forth about whether I made the right call there, and I still do not entirely know. Because there is a version of it where protecting an editor I have never met was not integrity at all. It was the same reflex I have had my whole life, the one that runs a cost calculation in 1/4 of a second and assigns the cost to me, dressed up in better clothes. I have been doing that since I was 14. I am not confident I can tell the difference from the inside. What I know is this. I asked myself one question, and it was the question Odile had put to me in June, and which I have used probably 40 times since. Am I doing this to win, or to be understood? Attaching the email would not have made me win. We were already winning. The chart and the perjury filing had done that. Attaching the email would have made me feel seen. It would have put a document into the world that said, in effect, look, somebody knew. It was not in my head. That is a want. It is a real one, and it is not shameful, but it is not worth a stranger's job. So we sent the line, and not the letter. The 3 weeks before the mediation were the worst part of the whole year, and nothing happened in them, which is exactly why. This is the part nobody tells you about. Everyone imagines the confrontation. Nobody imagines the waiting, and the waiting is 90% of it. I could not sleep, not the ordinary kind. I would go to bed at 9 because I get up at 4, and I would lie there and run the mediation in my head, all 9 versions of it, and in about half of them I said the wrong thing and lost everything, and in the other half I won and felt nothing. I lost 11 pounds without trying. Theo noticed before I did and started making me eat at the table instead of standing at the counter, which is a small thing that I think about often. I burned 2 full trays of morning buns in 1 week. I have burned perhaps 5 trays in 19 years. Beatriz took the schedule off me for a fortnight without asking. She simply started doing it, and when I noticed and said something, she said, "You are not here. You are on the 19th floor of a building 3 weeks from now. Go be there, I have this." And my mother called twice a week and did not ask about the mediation once, because it did not exist in her version, and talked about a neighbor's roof. The night before, I could not settle, so I did what I always do, which is that I went to the bakery at 11 at night and turned on 1 bank of lights and made a dough I did not need. I made the olive loaf, 6 kilos. There is no version of a Wednesday in September where we need 6 kilos of olive loaf. And while the mixer was going, I got notebook 41 down off the shelf and turned back to 2011, to the 14 months of rebuilding the sourdough culture after the power outage, because I wanted to look at something. I wanted to look at the page from the 11th of March 2011, which says, in handwriting I recognize as belonging to a very tired 27-year-old. Day 190. Still slack, still sour in the wrong way. Dad's jar from 1996 was the only thing left of the original, and I've been feeding a dead thing for 6 months. Start again tomorrow with the rye. If this doesn't work, I don't know what I tell people. And then, in the margin, added later in different ink, the way I add things. It worked. 14 Sep 2011. Don't ever throw the old jar away. I sat on a flour sack in a mostly dark bakery at 11:30 the night before a mediation, and read a sentence I wrote to myself 15 years ago, and it said, "Don't ever throw the old jar away," and I laughed out loud alone in a building. Because that is the entire thing. That is what those 41 notebooks are. They are one woman leaving messages for herself across 19 years, in the specific belief that nobody else would ever read them, and it turned out that was the only reason they were worth anything at all. I took the loaves out at 1. I left 4 on the rack for Beatriz with a note that said, for the front, "No charge, tell people it's a mistake batch." Then I went home and slept, properly for 5 hours, for the first time in 3 weeks. The mediation was in September, on the 19th floor of a building downtown, in a conference room with a view of the river and a bowl of wrapped mints that nobody touched all day. There were 9 people, Odile and Wendell and me on one side, Priya Raghunathan and 2 associates for Hale Brands, a woman named Constance Weil who was counsel for the acquirer and who said almost nothing for 6 hours and was the only person in the room who mattered, a mediator, a retired judge named Alvarez with an enormous gray mustache, and the patience of a man who has watched 10,000 people discover what they actually want. And Camille. She did not have to be there. Her own counsel had advised against it. She came anyway, and she sat at the far end of her side of the table like somebody at the wrong wedding. And when I came in, she looked at me and gave me a very small nod, and I gave her one back, and that was the entire communication between us for the whole day. Judge Alvarez explained the process. Then he asked each side to state, briefly, what they wanted. Priya Raghunathan said her client wanted a clean, permanent resolution of all claims and a full assignment. And Odile Sarot said, "My client wants 3 things, and none of them are money." I watched Constance Weil look up for the first time. The first thing was attribution. Not a lawsuit's worth of attribution. 1 line. In every future printing of both books, on the packaging of every licensed product using one of the 11 plus the cardamom knot, and in the credits of any future television production using them, the words, "Recipes by Gretchen Halloway." Priya said that was a marketing decision, not a legal one, and would need to be discussed. The second thing was the trademark. I would not assign it, not for any amount. I would grant Hale Brands a license, 5 years, renewable by agreement, limited to the frozen and packaged product line, revocable on material breach, with the retail bakery and anything baked in it carved out entirely and permanently. The mark would remain registered in my name. Priya said flatly that the acquirer required ownership. Odile said, pleasantly, that the acquirer required a signature, and that ownership was not on offer, and that we were happy to discuss the license fee, which we would be setting at $1 per year. That is the moment the room changed. I watched it happen. A woman offering to license a trademark worth a genuinely large amount of money for $1 a year is not negotiating, and everybody at that table understood instantly that whatever this was about, it was not going to be solved with the number they had brought. Then Odile said, and the third thing. My client will not sign a non-disparagement or confidentiality provision of any kind, Odile said. There will be no clause restricting what she may say about the origin, development, authorship, or history of any recipe, product, or brand element. Not now, not in any future document. And Hale Brands will waive any claim to her personal archive. The room was quiet. Priya Raghunathan said, "That's a non-starter." "Then we're finished," Odile said, and began, without any theater at all, to put the caps on her pens. Judge Alvarez called a caucus. For the next 4 hours, we sat in a small side room with bad coffee while he walked back and forth between us, and I learned what mediation actually is, which is a retired judge telling each side, separately, that they are being unrealistic, in a tone that makes it sound like he is on their side. At 2 in the afternoon, he came in and sat down heavily across from me and said, "MS, Holloway, can I ask you something as a person and not as a mediator?" "Yes." "They're going to come up on the money. Substantially. Why won't you take the confidentiality clause? Everybody signs those. It's boilerplate." And I said the thing I had been working out since a night in June at my own kitchen table. "Because I've already signed it," I said. "Not on paper. I signed it in 2019 when I said I'd rather be dead than be on television. I signed it in 2022 when I fixed her hydration numbers at 11 at night and didn't ask for my name. I've been keeping quiet about this for 19 years for free, and everybody in my life has arranged themselves around the fact that I would." He waited. "They're not asking me to start being quiet," I said. "They're asking me to promise I'll never stop. And I'm 42, and my mother is 74, and my sister is 38, and if I sign that, then the last true version of what happened in that building dies with me, and the only one left will be the one that tested well." Judge Alvarez looked at me for a while. Then he said, "I'm going to go tell them that in almost exactly those words. Do you object?" "No." At 4:20, Constance Wiles spoke for the first time all day. She had been in and out of the room for 6 hours with a phone in her hand and an expression of complete neutrality, and she stood up and buttoned her jacket and said, to Priya, not to us, "My client isn't buying a lawsuit, and it isn't buying a gag order that will be reported in a trade publication within a year. Give her the attribution, take the license, drop the confidentiality." Priya said, "Constance, the portfolio value assumes." "The portfolio value assumes an origin story," Constance Wiles said. "There's a woman on the other side of the table with 41 dated notebooks who is prepared to say the origin story is wrong, and you want me to advise my client to buy the story anyway and then hand her a clause that proves we knew." She picked up her folder. "No. Give her the line of credit on the packaging. It costs 11 cents. She left the room. There is a kind of silence that happens when the only person whose opinion is load-bearing says the thing out loud. It is not dramatic. It is administrative. It is the sound of 6 people simultaneously beginning to plan a different afternoon. We signed at 7:10 that night. Attribution, granted in all 3 formats. License, 5 years, $1 retail carved out, Mark stays mine. Confidentiality, struck, all of it, every clause. Odile made them initial the deletion on every page it had appeared on, which was 6 pages, because she does not trust anybody's document control. Money, $110,000, which is less than they had offered me in June, and I want that in the record, because for the rest of my life somebody will tell me I did this for money, and the arithmetic says otherwise. I took $70,000 less than I was offered in order to be allowed to talk. And the dissolution petition was dismissed with prejudice, and Camille's 40% came to me, and there was a paragraph acknowledging that the 41 notebooks are my personal property and that no party asserts any interest in them. The last thing before signature, Judge Alvarez asked if anyone had anything further, and my sister spoke for the first time in 11 hours. "I want to add something," Camille said, "to the attribution line. Can it say the other thing too?" Priya said, "Camille." "Can it say," my sister said, "recipes by Gretchen Holloway from the bakery of Anise Holloway?" Both names. And I looked down the length of that table at her. Because that is Anise. That is our grandmother, who is the actual beginning of all of it, and whose name Camille had filed for in April in a form she did not read, in 5 classes, as a brand. "Yes," I said, "it can say that." That was the only thing my sister and I said directly to each other that entire day. I drove home in the dark, and I did not feel the way I expected to feel. I have talked to enough people about this since to know that this is normal and nobody warns you. You spend 7 months in a state of controlled emergency, and the emergency ends at 7:10 on a Thursday in a room with a bowl of mints, and then you are in your car on the highway, and the radio is playing something stupid, and there is nothing to do. I called Theo from the car and said it's done, and he said what happened, and I said I'll tell you at home. And then I cried for about 90 seconds in a way that was more like coughing, and then I stopped and drove. I did not call my mother. She called me 11 days later to ask whether it was true that Camille had been pushed out of her own company, and I said that was not what happened, and she said Marjorie had heard something different, and I stood in my kitchen with the phone, and I made a decision that I had been circling for 2 months. Mom, I said, in February of 2004, you telephoned an admissions office in Lyon and told them I was declining my place. The silence on that line went on for a very long time. Where did you get that? She said. From them. It's in the file. There's a note. That was 22 years ago. Yes. And I am supposed to. What? Her voice climbed. I am 74 years old, and I am supposed to sit here and be put on trial by my own daughter about a telephone call. I'm not putting you on trial, I said, and I meant it. I'm telling you that I know. That's all. I'm not asking you for anything. Then what is the point of saying it? And I said, because I've spent 22 years thinking I wasn't good enough, and I wasn't wrong about being sad. I was just wrong about the reason. And I'm not carrying the wrong reason anymore. My mother said, you always did have to make everything so heavy, and hung up on me. We speak now a little. She has never mentioned it again. I have stopped expecting her to. Here is what the year afterward actually looked like, and it is not tidy, and I am not going to make it tidy. The transaction closed in November. Camille stayed on for the earn-out period and then did not renew, which is a phrase that means a great many things and none of them are pleasant. Cami Hale still exists. She has a smaller company now and a podcast that is genuinely good and about a third of the audience she had. She has never publicly said what happened. I want to be honest that this bothered me for about 4 months and then stopped bothering me, and I am not entirely sure why it stopped. The packaging changed in the second quarter. I did not know it was coming. Beatriz brought a bag of frozen morning bun dough into the office in April with an expression I could not read, and turned it over, and there it was on the back panel in 6-point type under the nutrition information. Recipes by Gretchen Halloway, from the bakery of Anise Halloway. 6-point type, smaller than the allergen warning. I sat down on the floor of my own office, and Beatriz sat down next to me on the floor, which is not a thing a woman of her dignity does, and we looked at the back of a bag of frozen dough together for about 10 minutes. 19 years, she said. 6-point type. Greta, she nudged me. It is on 11,000 bags. Emilio came back in June. He had been at a hotel kitchen downtown for 2 years, and he called me and asked if we were hiring, and I said we were hiring him specifically. He came in, and we did not talk about 2023 for about 6 weeks, and then one night at close he said, I read about it, in the trade thing. Because it did get reported, in the end. Not in a big way. A trade publication ran 900 words in February under a headline about brand provenance disputes, and because there was no confidentiality clause, I was able to talk to the reporter. And because I was able to talk to the reporter, there is now a published account with dates in it. That is the entire value of the thing I gave up $70,000 for. 900 words in a trade publication that maybe 4,000 people read. I would do it again tomorrow. I thought you knew and didn't care, Emilio said. That's why I left. I thought you knew she was doing it and you were fine with it, and I thought, if she's fine with that, then nothing here is real. I did know, I said, and I wasn't fine with it. I was just quiet, which from the outside looks identical. He nodded slowly. It does, he said. I have thought about that exchange more than the mediation. Everything I did in that conference room was an argument about who made something. But the actual damage, the damage that cost me a good baker for 2 years and made a woman I respect wonder what kind of place she worked in, that was not done by Camille. That was done by my silence, which I had always told myself was a kindness, and which had been read by every person in that building as consent. You do not get to be quiet and also be understood. I was 42 before anybody explained that to me, and the person who explained it was a front-of-house manager sitting on an office floor. I went to Lyon in October. Not for 9 months. I am 43 and I own a bakery, and I have a husband and 11 employees, and the 9 months was a 19-year-old's life, not mine. I went for 5 weeks to a professional intensive, and I paid for it out of the settlement, and Beatrice ran the shop and did not call me once, which I found insulting and then found moving. I was the oldest person in the room by 11 years. There was a chef there named Gaspard who was about 60 and who watched me shape for 2 days and then said in English, "Where did you learn this?" I taught myself. "No," he said, "somebody taught you. This, with the heel of the hand, this is not invented." And I said, "My grandmother," and he said, "Yes," and went away satisfied. And I stood at a bench in France with my hands in a dough, and understood that I had been carrying a woman's hands around inside my own for 30 years without noticing. I was not brilliant there. I want to say that. I was solidly middle of the class. There were 26-year-olds doing things I cannot do. But on the 11th day, we did a laminated dough in a room that was humid and hot in a way that Lyon in October has no business being. And everybody's butter blew out. And I looked at the room temperature and the state of the dough, and I said, out loud, without thinking, "Take it to 58 and give it another 40 minutes. And Gaspard looked at me and said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I did 406 of these in a building with no air conditioning." That is the only time in 5 weeks I said something no one else in the room knew. It was enough. That is what I did not expect. It turned out that one sentence was enough, and that I had come all that way to find out that the thing I had grieved for 22 years was a room I already knew how to stand in. Camille and I did not speak for 14 months. Then in December she sent a photograph, no message. It was a picture of a bag of frozen dough turned over to the back panel, taken in the freezer aisle of a supermarket in another state, with her thumb in the corner of the frame. I looked at it for a long time. I wrote back, 6-point type. She wrote, "I asked them to make it bigger. They said it was a packaging cycle thing. I'm still asking." That is where we are. That is the entire relationship now, and I do not know yet whether it is the beginning of something or the polite end of something, and I have made my peace with not knowing. She has not apologized for Atlanta. She has apologized for Lyon in that kitchen at 1 in the morning, which is the larger of the two things by an enormous margin, and I have not decided what to do with it. Here is what I have decided. I am not going to be the one who holds it. That is a separate thing from forgiving her, and it took me a year to find the difference. Forgiving her would mean saying it did not cost me anything, and it cost me a great deal, and I am not going to lie about the number. I have never lied about a number in my life. But I am not going to carry it around in my coat pocket and take it out and look at it, either. Because I did that with Lyon for 22 years, and the thing about carrying a stone is that everyone can see you doing it and no one can see the stone. Lorraine Holloway had a fall in March and is in a facility now, 40 minutes from me, and I go on Sundays. She does not remember the phone call. I have to be careful how I say this. I do not mean she has forgotten it dishonestly. I mean the machinery has started to go, and 2004 is one of the years that has become soft. So the woman I would need to have that conversation with is not there anymore. She is a small, frightened, sometimes very funny old woman who wants to know if I have eaten, and who calls me Anise about 1 visit in 4, which is her own mother's name, and which I have decided not to correct. I take her the cardamom knots. She eats about 1/3 of one and tells me they are too rich and then eats the rest. Last month she held my hand and said, out of nowhere, in a completely clear voice, "You were the steady one," and my whole body went cold. And then she said, "It was a terrible thing to do to a child," and I could not tell you under oath whether she meant Lyon or the bakery or something else entirely from a year I know nothing about, and I did not ask, because I have learned that some questions are asked for the asker's benefit, and this would have been one of them. I said, "It's all right, Mom." It is not all right, but it was true that I was not going to make an old woman with a soft memory carry it for me, and those are two different statements, and I have got much better at holding two things at once. The bakery is fine. I know that is an anticlimax, and I am going to let it be one. We are not a brand. We did not expand. A man from a private equity firm came in last spring and bought a coffee and asked whether I had ever thought about a second location. And I said no, and he left me his card, and I threw it away in front of him, which was rude, and which I enjoyed. There are 12 employees now. Beatriz has a share of the business, 5%, executed properly, read by a lawyer, signed at a table in daylight by a woman who understood every word of it. That took me 9 months to arrange, and it is the single thing from this entire story I am proudest of. Emilio runs the second bake. I still get there at 4. I have tried twice to stop getting there at 4, and both times I lasted about 11 days. The notebooks came back from the storage unit in November and went onto the shelf in the office where they had been for 19 years. 41 of them, and then 42, which I started in the December of the mediation, and which begins, on the first page, with a room temperature and a flower lot number, and a note about a batch of olive loaves that came out flat because I had let the starter go too far. I have thought about publishing them. 2 people have asked. There is a version of the next 10 years where the 41 notebooks become a book of their own, and it would sell, and there is a certain justice in it that I can feel the shape of. I do not think I am going to. Partly because they are not written to be read. They are written to be used, by me, at 4 in the morning, and the moment I know a stranger is reading them, page 1 of Notebook 43 will be a performance, and then I will have lost the only tool I have ever had. But mostly it is this. The reason those notebooks won was never that they were beautiful or moving or a good story. They won because they were boring and dated and kept without any thought of an audience, for 19 years, by a woman who had no idea she was ever going to need them. You cannot fake that. It is the one thing on this earth that cannot be manufactured after the fact, and the second you start keeping a record for the future courtroom, it stops being a record and becomes a case. So they go on the shelf, and I keep writing the number down. Somebody asked me last month, a young woman doing a stage with us who is 24 and reminds me of nobody so much as myself, what the lesson was. She meant it kindly. She wanted a sentence she could use. I gave her a bad answer at the time, and I have thought about it since, so here is the real one. I used to believe that if you did the work spoke for you. That is the story every quiet, competent person is raised on, and it is a lie, and it is a specific kind of lie because it is almost true. The work does speak. It just does not say your name. The Morning Bun speaks. It has been speaking for 19 years, 406 attempts worth, to every person who has ever driven in from 3 towns over. And for 4 of those years it said the name Kami Hale, and it said it beautifully, and it never once said mine, and the work did not care. The work is not on anybody's side. Your name is a separate job. Nobody tells the steady ones that. We are told the opposite. We are told that wanting your name on the thing is vanity, and that the good ones let the work stand for itself. And I believed that so completely that I stayed up at 11 at night correcting my sister's hydration percentages so that my recipes would go into the world accurate and anonymous, and I felt virtuous doing it. It was not virtue. It was a habit of disappearing that somebody taught me when I was small, and that everybody around me found extremely convenient, and that I mistook for character for 30 years. 900 words in a trade publication. 6-point type on 11,000 bags. A line in a book's front matter that most people will never read. That is what it cost 7 months. $70,000 I did not take, a family, and whatever my sister and I used to be. People ask if it was worth it, and they usually ask in a tone that suggests they think it was not. Here is my answer. In February, a woman emailed the shop. She had been a line cook, she had left the industry, and she had read the 900 words, and she said she had spent 6 years watching a chef she used to work for teach her dishes on television. She said, I didn't know that was a thing that had a name. I didn't know you were allowed to say anything. That email is printed out, and it is in the front of Notebook 42, folded in half, and it will be there for as long as I have the notebook. That is what it bought, not justice, not my sister back, not the 9 months in Lyon when I was 19, which nobody can give me, and which I have finally stopped asking for. It bought one woman finding out she was allowed to say something. I open at 4. The oven takes 40 minutes to come to temperature, and in that 40 minutes there is nothing to do but the Messie and the notebook. And so at about 20 past 4 every morning, I sit on a flour sack with a $3 composition book on my knee and I write down the date, and the room temperature, and what happened yesterday. My grandmother did it. My father did it badly for 11 pages. I have done it for 19 years and it has never once, not one single morning, felt important. It is the least dramatic act I know. It is the opposite of standing on a stage in Atlanta in front of 300 people. Nobody applauds. There is no audience, and there is not going to be one, and the whole point is that there is not going to be one. But it turns out that a plain account, kept honestly, by somebody who was actually in the room, is the hardest thing in the world to argue with. Not because it is powerful, because it is patient. It just sits there on a shelf being true for 19 years in $3 notebooks, waiting for the afternoon somebody decides to tell everyone you were never there. I do not write it down anymore so that I can prove it. I write it down so that the next time somebody tells me what my own life was, I will already know.